Okay, we're going to be in Revelation chapter 3. I thought maybe we would get all the way through the letters, but I'm going to save Laodicea for next week. We'll look at Sardis and Philadelphia tonight. There's just too much good stuff, so no need to get in a hurry. Lord willing, we'll get to have another shot or two at it. But I wanted to show you where we are. We're coming back down the other side now. We were at Thyatira, so we've gone down to Sardis. Sardis and Philadelphia are not very far apart at all. And then you drop on down to Laodicea, where we hope to be next week. And just south, not very far at all from Laodicea, is Colossae. So when Paul writes to the Colossians, he says, when you have read your letter, make sure that the Laodiceans get it. And when the Laodiceans have read their letter, make sure you read theirs. So Colossae is not one of the 7 churches that gets a letter, but it's right there. So those folks were very much in the loop of the churches in Asia Minor. All right, but we're going to be in Sardis tonight. This is the big hill on which Sardis sat, and it's about 1,500 feet, pretty sheer straight up. And as a result, there were 3 sides of Sardis that were just, you didn't have to defend them basically, and the 4th side that was easily defended. So Sardis was only overrun twice in all of its history. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but that is the hill on which Sardis originally sat. Some old pictures of the gymnasiums. In Roman society, gymnasiums were very much in style, in vogue in those days. If you think about the things that at least young America counts as being important, being in good shape, being good athletes, heroic athletics, they cared about the same kind of things. They were the ones that started the Olympic Games, obviously. So it was a very health-conscious, body-conscious society. And so there were gymnasiums everywhere. This one just happens to be at Sardis. The exterior view and the interior view. They also had a lot of bathhouses, and I was doing some reading today in a book about what was life like in the Roman Empire. And they said that most bathhouses had 3 different baths. So you would come in, and there would be a large courtyard, maybe like that one up on top, and you would work out, play your games, do whatever it was you were going to do athletically. Then you would go in and go to the hot pool. And no, I take that back. You would go to the tepid pool. You'd go to the one that's lukewarm. And after a little while in the lukewarm, you'd get rubbed down with oil or whatever, and then you'd get in the hot tub. And at the very end, you'd jump in the frigid air is actually the name of the kind of tub it was. You'd jump in the frigid air and freeze yourself before you went back out. So anyway, it was a very common thing for Romans to be involved in gymnasiums and bathhouses. All right, so let's read the letter, starting in chapter 3, verse 1. Excuse me?
How'd they get their water frigid?
I know how they got it hot. I don't know how they got it cold. It may have been spring-fed. The hot water, a lot of them had hot springs. Just think Hot Springs, Arkansas. Right. And how did your water get cold in Hot Springs?
We cooled it.
It was cool, yeah. So some of them had ways, well, put it underground for a while, cool it down, but some of them just had cold springs. So you'd feed in the hot water from the hot spring and the cold water from the cold spring. Haven't read that page yet. Maybe I'll read that tomorrow and find out how they made the cold water cold.
I'm sorry, you said
All right, chapter 3, starting in verse 1. To the angel of the church in Sardis, write, these are the words of him who holds the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die. For I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard. Hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The only one who is victorious, or the one who is victorious, will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So there's a lot of neat stuff. Jesus gives his introduction again, has something to do with the vision. He's the one that holds the 7 stars, but he says he's also the one who holds the 7 spirits. So as he's working with the 7 stars, he's working with the churches, he also has all the power of God, the number 7 being the perfection of the Spirit, and he holds that perfection of Spirit in his hand. So there's nothing that Jesus cannot achieve. And in the same way, there's nothing that these churches should fear, because Jesus has the 7 spirits of God at his disposal. He can do whatever he needs to do with the power that he is. And so as he's talking to the 7 churches and he's talking to the messengers of the churches, he has all the power that he needs to handle the things that need to be handled. He says, you have a reputation of being alive, but really you're dead. Wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, or I'll come like a thief in the night. And that's where the 2 times that they were defeated come in. About 550 BC, the army came and camped against them. They won a couple of battles outside the city. But then the folks of Sardis withdrew up the hill into the city and kind of locked themselves in and figured that they could stay out there for as long a siege as the other king the king of Cyrus wanted to do. What ends up happening, one of their soldiers is on one of the watchtowers and he drops his helmet off. And so he goes down and he follows this little craggly path down the side of the mountain and gets his helmet and goes back up. Well, one of Cyrus's soldiers saw him do it, so he knew that there was just a little bitty pathway that you could actually climb up the side of this 1,500 foot hill. So he gets some of his buddies, they crawl up the side of the mountain and surprise attack and overthrow the city. So they learned their lesson, right? No. About 218 BC, about 400 years later or so, there was another army. This was Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the Great, comes and camps out up front. And his soldiers figure out, well, if we just crawl up this little crag, we'll be able to get up there behind them, and they did. And so it fell exactly the same way twice, and the problem was they weren't being very vigilant. They figured they were safe, everything's fine, and they quit watching. So Jesus says, if you don't repent and pay attention, I'm going to come like a thief in the night. I'm going to show up when you don't expect me. Now that thief in the night reference shows up several times in the New Testament, right? Jesus uses it in his preaching. I think Paul mentions it in his preaching. And again, here it shows up in the Revelation. The idea that the coming of Christ will be secret and sudden. The difference for Christians is we're watching for it, anticipating it, wanting it. The world needs to be worried about Jesus showing up as a thief in the night. For us, it's a happy reunion. It's a time of celebration. But for those who are not prepared, it's like a thief in the night. He's going to come and take from them what they thought was secure. So here's this bunch of folks in Sardis who on more than one occasion have allowed themselves to be conquered because they weren't paying attention. They weren't watching. Jesus goes on to say that there's a problem in you finishing things that you start. I've noticed that there is nothing among your deeds that is finished. Right? You start things, but you don't finish things. I think the King James has the word perfected. I don't find anything in your works that is perfected. The root word has to do with finishing things. To start from something and to eventually get to the point where you can say, we came, we saw, we finished. And this group evidently was good at starting stuff. We don't know what kind of beginnings they had. We assume that maybe while Paul was at Ephesus and the word was traveling around Asia Minor, that these guys got the message too. Maybe they got excited about it at the time that they were converted, but they've just kind of lapsed into sleep. It's similar to what Jesus says to Ephesus, you've left your first love. but it seems to be less about their desire to do something good as to just lackadaisical, someday we'll get it, just eventually kind of thinking that these folks in Sardis had. But they hadn't finished what they started, and so again, Jesus says, you better wake up, or I'll come like a thief. But you have a few folks, even in Sardis, who have not soiled their garments. Now, Sardis was another one of those places where it would have been very easy to just fall in with the population. It was a pretty paganistic, ungodly kind of place, and the Sardis Christians would have found it very easy to just go along to get along with the rest of the people in town. So Jesus says, there are a few of you who have not soiled your garments, which tells us that there were a whole bunch of them that had. Right? So the majority of the congregation was struggling to hang on to their Christianity in the face of being surrounded by other people who didn't think like they thought, didn't know what they knew. He says, but the ones who have not soiled their garments, they will walk with me in white. And then he goes on a little bit farther down and says that the ones who are victorious, the overcomers, will also be dressed in white. Another one of the things I was reading today was about how they cleaned clothes, and I won't go into detail about that because it's just nasty the way they clean clothes. But there was very little white in their culture because the yarn that they made out of the sheep was kind of an off-white, beigey, light brown kind of color. And most people, that's what they had. So if you had somebody who actually had white clothing and could keep it white, they probably had some money. So when we talked about Thyatira and their wealth in making and dyeing, purple cloth, just having a straight white something in their culture wasn't an easy thing to do either. So these, the furriers, the people that clean the clothes, a farrier does horseshoes, right?
Yes.
So that's not it. I'll have to go back and read my book again. Whatever they called the folks who did the cleaning of the clothes, they were at a loss. It was very difficult to get something to a pure white state. So to have that meant that you were well off. So they're clean because they're pure, and they're clean because it's something expensive. So Jesus is not just giving them something that's white. Okay, that's nice, I got something white. He's giving them something that denotes purity, and that he's giving them a really nice gift. It's something that's more special than just the color that it is. The ones who are victorious will be dressed in white, and I will never blot their name out of the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. So there's two different promises kind of tied together. The first one is, I will never blot his name or her name out of the book of life. What is the book of life? Among the Jews, I'm sorry, somebody? No? Okay, it has something to do with judgment. Eventually, that's where we end up with that phrase. The Jews kept a book, kind of a census book, of the people who were alive. And when you died, then they'd strike through your name. Okay? So here are all the people who are living. There was also in the Old Testament several references to the book of life. There's also references to the books of the dead. Right? So you've got the people who are alive, people who are dead. But basically in the Revelation, it has to do with folks who are right with God. So if your name is in the book of life, it means that you're the one that's going to keep on living. It's those who will get past judgment and into the heavenlies. And it shows up several times, but perhaps most importantly, it gets a different name as you go through the Revelation. It's the Lamb's book of life. So here when Jesus says, I will not blot your name out of the book of life, we eventually see that he has control of the book. He has the right to say, this one's in, this one's out. Okay? Let me read you a couple of passages. Go over to chapter 20, Revelation 20, and verse 11.
While you're looking, out the name? I wonder if they had to go back in there and try to erase the right Lazarus' name back.
The ones that Jesus brought back. Oops, Adam. They put a line down, so we'll add him in back down here. Revelation 20, beginning in verse 11. It's one of my favorite passages in the Revelation. I once had a teacher at a school it was in Garland, but it was originally Abilene Christian at Dallas, and now it's, I think, Amberton University is what they call it. But this teacher would read from the Greek and translate as he went. Okay, and he just amazed me, loved the man. And he would quote Scripture, and whenever he would quote Scripture, he would hook a thumb up under his overall, and he would put this hand pointing back toward the back of the room, and he would rock back and forth. And he would start quoting, and this passage, "Behold, I saw a great white throne." I'll never forget it. That guy was just an amazing, amazing teacher. Now I've lost my place. Okay, back over to Revelation 20 and verse 11. "I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done." Don't like that part of the passage. But verse 14, "Death and Hades were then thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire." So you've got all these other books about what you've done, but there's one book that really counts. That's the book of life, right? So the Lamb's book of life is the one that says, I'm going to heaven or I'm going to hell. So Jesus here tells the folks in Sardis, if you'll get your act together, and if you'll walk with me in white, then I will never take your name out of the book of life, which means you've got eternal life, right? I'm not going to blot your name out. And then he says, I will acknowledge that name before my Father. Remember when Jesus said, the one that confesses me before men, him will I confess before the Father. But if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before the Father. It's the same principle that he's telling the folks at Sardis. If you'll hang in there, if you'll be faithful, I'll acknowledge you. So not only are we talking about, hypothetically, God reading through the book of life and saying, okay, there's Robert's name. Robert, you're in the book of life. And not only does God say it, but then Jesus chimes in. It says, I know this one. He belongs to me. Right? So it's a tremendous promise to this group, but first they need to get their act together. First they need to remember to get reinvigorated and to do the things that they set out to do, and instead of ending up being caught like a thief in the night. All right. To Philadelphia. Philadelphia is kind of an interesting place just because it was named a lot of different things, but there was one brother who was the king. The next brother who came into power loved his brother so much that he named it Philadelphia in honor of his brother that he loved. The people loved the name Philadelphia. So as time went by through the centuries, other kings named it other things, but the people didn't. The people said, no, the name of this place is Philadelphia. So they held on to the tradition, they held on to the name that was given by the brother who cared so much about his own brother. The reason that I popped this one up, this is not even really extraordinary close geographically to where we are, but this temple of Zeus is a good example of something I want to show you, and it shows up in the letter to the folks at Philadelphia. See that inscription? You could buy a column. Has anybody ever bought a brick? Right, they're building a sidewalk or they're building a building, and you can buy a brick and put somebody's name on the brick. Same kind of thing. They had the inscription translated where I found this, but I didn't write it all down. But anyway, part of that is the name of the guy who donated that one. And in that particular temple, I think they said that he had donated about 17 of the columns. So his name was inscribed on all these different columns. So hang on to that thought, and we'll come back to it. These are not from the time period where we are. This is the ruins of a 7th century church that was named and dedicated to the Apostle John, which if you go through Asia Minor, tons of stuff dedicated to John. We think maybe he was buried at Ephesus, but other neighboring towns claim it because when people travel to that part of the world, they want to see where John's buried. And if you've got a John tomb, you can make more money that way. But anyway, right there, I don't know if you can see it well enough. Do you know what that is? Yeah, that's a minaret on top of a mosque. So all of Turkey, that surrounding area, is Muslim. So you could be standing in the middle of a Christian church from the 7th century, and every few hours you would hear the sounds when the minaret, either the cantor or a recorded sound comes on and calls all of the Islamic people to prayer. They pray 5 times a day, and each time it's time for prayer, then that minaret would come to life. It's probably recorded. Some of them have a live individual who goes up there and calls out the time of prayer from the top, but most of them just have speakers these days, and they just blare it out. And you I do not know. But yeah, that would be a close climb, wouldn't it? Yeah. You know part of what they say. Allahu Akbar. You familiar with that phrase? When they have riots in the Middle East, usually when they're burning American flags, they'll be yelling it at the top of their lungs. It means great is our God, Allah. Right? Allah is great. And they'll blare that out of that minaret to tell people it's time for prayer. All right. Go on down. All right, let's read Philadelphia. It's kind of a long letter. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, the one who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut. What he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So we don't have any archaeology in Philadelphia, or at least I didn't find any, that shows the idea of putting those placards onto the temple posts. But Jesus brings it up. He says, if you're faithful to me, if you hang in there, then I will inscribe your name on the pillars of the temple of God. Now, don't think he's talking about the physical temple. It's been gone about 20 years by this time. It was destroyed in 70. Well, more than 20, almost 30 years it's been gone. But the heavenly abode of God. Now, you're going to get farther into the Revelation and find out there's no temple in heaven. You don't need one because the Lamb and God are there in person. Right? So you don't have an actual temple facade, but the idea is there that it's a permanent thing. What's neat about those that we looked at is those pictures were taken about 2,000 years after the temple was put up. Right? So it's a very lasting thing to have your name etched in the granite, and it's still there. And the whole building falls down, and the archaeologists come in, and your name is still right there on that post. And when they set it back up, tourists come by, and if they can read any Greek, your name is still on that post, right? So there's an enduring quality to that idea that he'll be, he'll be a temple, a post in the temple. He'll be say the name, the thing that holds the ceiling up, a column. He'll be a column in the temple of my God, and then I'll write my name on him, and I'll write God's name on him, and it's a celebration of identity that you're part of us. And it's not going to stop. You're always going to be there. You're always going to be part of us. So there's a great promise that comes there. Did you notice the correction? None for Philadelphia. Right? We're going to get to Laodicea. It's the exact opposite. You get lots of chastisement, no praise. But for the folks at Philadelphia, things were going well. They were hanging in there. They were doing what they needed to do. And then he says, you're having a problem with the local Jews. Right? There's a synagogue that say they're Jews, excuse me, but actually they're a synagogue of Satan. This isn't the first time that Jesus referred to Jews as followers of Satan. In John chapter 8, he's having that long-winded discussion about who he is and whose will he's doing and all those kinds of things. And eventually he says, the reason that you want to kill me is because you want to do the work of your father, the devil. So he's convinced that even though they were Jewish and even though they had a synagogue, that doesn't mean they belong to God. They're actually working for the other team. It's been conjectured that since in the Revelation, in order to be connected to Satan, you're somebody that's persecuting. Satan is the ultimate persecutor. Rome is part of the persecution. That possibly this synagogue of Jews at Philadelphia was turning in folks, was working for the Roman government, was working against the Christians. And as a result, Jesus refers to them as the synagogue of Satan. And he says, you just wait. I will make them come and bow down in front of you and admit that you belong to me. So there's a relationship going on that is pure and wonderful that's being maligned by this Jewish synagogue. And Jesus says, one of these days, you just wait. I'll fix this. And we don't know how he fixed it or when he fixed it or exactly what he meant. Did he mean that the synagogue would actually get converted and realize that he was Messiah and join the church? Or is he saying that at some point from afar, even though they don't respond, that they realize that the church is the real deal and that Jesus really did love them? We don't know how it was fulfilled. It's a great promise, right? If you're in the middle of being persecuted and pushed around by the Jews in that synagogue, and Jesus says, no, I don't love them, I love you. And I'm going to make sure that they understand how much I love you. However that happened, it was a great, great promise. And then he says, I'm going to open a door that no one can shut. This is a reference back to a prophecy in Isaiah 22, and we won't go read all of it, but basically the promise is to an individual who is taking over the responsibilities of the kingdom of Judah at that point. And he's told, you will have the keys of your father David. And whatever you open will be opened. Whatever you close will be closed. It sounds a little similar to what Jesus told his disciples. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. But Jesus is saying, I have the power to open doors for you, to make things happen for you. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop what I decide I'm going to do. Right? I'm God. I have the seven spirits. I'm the one who is the ultimate power for the churches. And even though things are not clearly in your favor right now, you still have a relationship with me. And as long as you have a relationship with me, if I open the door for you, the door is going to stay open and you'll be able to go through and do whatever it is that I need you to do. And then the last thing, which is one we can't really answer, they'll be kept from the hour of the what's the word the NIV uses? The hour of trial is what the NIV has. That's going to come on the whole world. Well, typically in the Revelation, when they say whole world, what they mean is Roman Empire. So we're not necessarily thinking about China in this passage. I went and did some reading on the most universal losses of life. How many people by percentage died in different wars, different, onslaughts of illnesses, all that kind of stuff. And there's just nothing that jumps off the page at you and says, this is absolutely what Jesus must have been talking about. Whatever the hour of trial was, it was an hour. It was a time. Right? It wasn't something that was going to go on and on and on and on. It was something that was going to happen and then end. But we really, or at least I really don't know, what that time of trial represents. I think that it would have been something short term, because he's promising a group of people who are living in Philadelphia in 95, 98, somewhere in there, AD, that he's going to keep them safe from whatever this hour of trial is. What difference would it make to them if he was going to keep them from the hour of trial if they'd been dead for 2,000 years? Right? So throwing it to the end of time and saying, well, he must be talking about the rapture, or he must be talking about tribulation, or all the things that people throw around. It's really difficult for me to get from I'm going to save you because you're being faithful from the hour of trial that's going to happen 2,000 years from now. It's not a very personal thing. Now, to argue the other side of that, if what we're looking at in the 7 letters are attitudes of life, if you're faithful, whenever the hour of trial is, Jesus will keep you from it. If it's attitudes of the church, there are some in the church that are not faithful. They won't be kept from the hour of trial whenever it is. But again, in my humble opinion, we're talking about something that was going to happen fairly soon. The largest loss of life on the planet, as far as most scholars are concerned, was actually World War II. So it's kind of toward our generation. There were 4 point, no, that's not right. I don't have the actual number of deaths, but 3% of the world's population died during that 6-7 year period. So it was a huge loss of life. But still, we're talking about 3%. And we're talking about a war that did not involve itself with, we call it the World War, but basically it was fought in Europe and East Asia, right, over in Japan. So there's not, everybody didn't get to be part of that. So I decided at least I needed to look and see how many people had died worldwide from COVID, because since we're, if we're trying to throw this to the end of time, and we're almost to the end of time, COVID has to be the new worldwide problem that we have. So far, 4.55 or 4.5 million deaths worldwide out of 7.5 billion. I tried to do the math as to what the percentage is. It was minuscule. I mean, one person dying from COVID is too many. But 4.5 million is not even a small share of the current world population. So, of course, lots more people have been sick with it than have died from it. But again, it's very difficult to take a statement like that from Jesus, I'll keep you from the hour of trial that's going to test the whole world, and pinpoint when that might have been or when it might be in the future. So, any questions about either one of those churches?